We'll begin in a moment. I'm just trying to start the live stream on YouTube.
I just want to see the presentation without breaking my neck.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming in. We have several residents here at the log cabin, and we have a few joining us on Zoom as well. I appreciate you all taking your time this morning, especially on a Saturday, to be with us. I wanted to be able to provide an opportunity for Calvin Giordano, who is not only our building department, but also our planning department, for them to be able to take a look at a project that the commission requested we start looking at. There's two components to this project. One is with regards to the oversized developments on properties. A jargon or a slang term for it that many people understand it to be is McMansions. And then you also have some potential tree regulations that we've been looking at because the commission wanted to protect the canopy throughout the village. And there's a lot of confusion between what the county and the state would allow. So the presentation today will kind of talk about those things and potentials, options that we may have. What I'm hoping for us to settle today is for everybody to start getting on the same wavelength when it comes to terminology and start defining what some of the expectations are. This is only the second opportunity for community feedback. The first was at a planning and zoning meeting. They've received the presentation, they've made some feedback that they'd like to see as a board. And so the presentation you'll see today has that in mind. Once we get feedback here with regard to the tree regulation, we'll then go to the Park and Parkway Advisory Board to go a little bit more into the details of certain aspects. And then once we collect that, then the commission at a later time will have a formal discussion at a commission board. And then we'll take all that feedback and then come back again with a more defined ordinance and what that process may look like. Joining me today here are Mayor O'Halpin, Vice Mayor Kennedy, Commissioner Hamelberg, and Commissioner Gonzalez. So thank you all for taking your time to come out. We also have from Calvin Giordano, we have Alex David, who also acts as the village planner, as well as Gianno Fioli, who is not only an urban planner, he also has done quite a bit of work when it comes to parks and urban landscaping and so forth. He's actually our contract manager for Calvin Giordano. He's the main point person. So I'm going to allow them to share their screen and introduce themselves so that you all can get to know them and we can begin. It's on you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on a Saturday. We certainly appreciate everybody's time. Our goal today, is this better? Our goal today, as the manager just pointed out, is to have this conversation, particularly about proposed recommendations that we're going to be making to the land development regulations that are going to impact the overall volume and articulation of some of the new buildings that may come in as redevelopment happens or rebuilds, as well as looking at some of the landscaping and preservation of the trees. So we've broken down the presentation, particularly in those topics. The way that we've structured the presentation is that we're going to give you a brief introduction, give you a history of why we're here, how we got here. Then we'll have a conversation about zoning specific to building and mass articulation. We'll take a pause. We'll open it up for feedback, and then we'll talk specifically about tree preservation through the specimen trees. So heading on with the introduction, just very briefly, a little bit about who we are as a company. Calvin Giordano and Associates has been in business for over 80 years. In fact, this is our next year is going to be our 85th anniversary. And we provide a series of different services that includes not only planning, engineering, landscape architecture, urban design, surveying, and emergency management, but we provide those particularly as a package. And some of the experience that we bring to bear can be personified in the amount of years that both of us, Alex and I, have cumulatively been working. Alex has been working as a planner for over 35 years. He is your town planner. He was one of the originators of your comp plan and some of your zoning maps and some of the language that you already have in place. He's had extensive experience not only working in local municipalities, but also at the county level as well. I have been privileged to work in many local municipalities, particularly in this area. We bring to bear some of the experience that we did in writing the landscape, the urban forestry master plan for the city of Miami Beach, where we had to deal with, how do we sort of balance the preservation of urban canopy, maximize the benefits that those bring to the community, and still navigate the issue that, you don't want to make regulations so prohibitive that they can curtail or prevent development from happening. So we're trying to walk that fine line. I've written several zoning codes. The closest one here is for the town of Surfside. We wrote that a landscape code from the ground up. We've also written them for places such as Weston, Miramar, Pembroke Pines. So we have a wealth of experience that we bring to the table. A little bit on the history of this project. And I'm going to stick to the script only because otherwise I can be here until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we don't want that. So we're going to try and get you out of here by 11. So the commission directed staff to explore a very focused conversation, particularly to the LDR. So what we're not talking about today is a complete rewrite. We're only talking about a very focused conversation that sought to look at massing and volume of buildings relative to how they impact the neighboring properties, how those buildings can be articulated in a way so that you don't end up with large boxes and large cubes, and how do we, in light of a new statute that was approved by the state, how do we help to preserve some of the existing mature canopy that you already have, which is so distinctive to everywhere else in the area. So the city engaged, the village engaged us to perform the task. A little over a month and a half ago, we took our initial research, our initial findings to the planning board, had some conversations with them. We got great feedback. And then we incorporated some of that feedback into the things that we're going to be discussing with you today. The objective that we want to achieve is to be able to share with you what was presented to the planning board. The presentation that we have for you today is an advancement of what we showed them. We want to share with you some of our preliminary recommendations. And we want to solicit some of your feedback on, where do you think that we should go relative to these issues of massing and distribution, articulation, and the preservation strategies that we're looking at. It is important to sort of put this conversation in a framework. Generally, whenever we do planning work, we have to understand that planning decisions have both a financial impact, not only on the property owners and their ability to rebuild, but also it corrals what they can do on their property. So when you start telling people that they cannot do whatever it is that they want to do, that they have to do something that what we're going to call is context sensitive, then what you find is that some of these regulations can be highly litigated. So what we want to do is that we want to position our approach to drafting this language in a way where we build on precedents that other municipalities have done so that we can curtail and corral the amount of litigation that could happen if somebody seeks to contest this. And the way to do that is first by looking at well-established and enforced regulations that other like position municipalities have done. And then take those as precedents and tailor them to the identity and the quality that you're seeking here in the village, and ensure that the regulations that we're putting in place are not ones that are too onerous. So that's generally how we do it. It is important to recognize that even though we did take this to the planning board and we got a lot of great feedback from the planning board, ultimately, our goal is to provide recommendations to the commission. And it's the responsibility of the planning board to enforce the direction that the commission is going to give them. So what we are doing is incorporating a lot of the comments that we've gotten from the planning board. They're the ones that are charged with ensuring compatibility with your comp plan and guiding the development process so that the final products look like they belong in BIscayne Park, that they don't feel like they're either too massive or too out of scale with the local community. So one of the problems that I think sort of may have sparked, this is in my neighborhood in Miami, where there are no real controls for articulation and massing. And what you find is that there are a lot of properties that are being developed right up to the property line. They're building these little McMansions, and they are essentially encroaching within the privacy of the properties that are next door. So we have to balance with the regulations, the ability for people to be able to build what they want on their property without being so restrictive that we start encroaching on their rights to be able to do what they want on their property. So it's about designing and regulating sensitivity, right? That's an interesting way of sort of looking at it. So it's this kind of relationship at the side property lines, particularly, that we're going to be focusing on. Because in the event that you have two properties built next to each other, what you end up with is the sort of massing, which with very small gaps, windows that essentially are 20 feet from each other, looking into each other's property. How do you navigate that? That can be very difficult. So, you know, we're trying to understand how we can modulate that. It is important to sort of highlight the fact that you are, first and foremost, all residential, with the exception of a few properties. We looked at the average parcel size. So the average parcel size, there are some variations, but generally they're 75 feet wide by 150 feet deep. And currently your side setbacks are 10 feet on either side. So that gives you a 55-foot buildable area within which people can place their buildings. In addition to the setbacks, you also have pervious areas and open space requirements that also help to sort of minimize the overall maximum big box. But I think it's important to ask ourselves, what can fit within 55 feet? So on the picture on the left, you have a 75-foot wide property with a 60-foot buildable width, and they've been able to fit a duplex. Similarly, on the right image, you have the 50-foot wide property with 5-foot setbacks and a 40-foot buildable area, and they can also fit a duplex. And the reason why I think it's important to sort of highlight this is because as we start talking about taking your 75-foot average width, taking away your 10 feet on both sides, giving you the 55 feet, and start building requirements for articulation, some of the argument that you might hear back is, well, the lots are not wide enough. You're making them, but you can actually fit a good amount of living space within these areas. And the one interesting feedback that I got something like 12 years ago when we were drafting a great deal of articulation regulations within the code that we were writing in Surfside was one of the architects that came to the to the outreach had said that they actually were not averse to the articulations requirements because it just forced them to be more innovative with their design, right? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex. I'm going to turn it over to Alex. Alex is going to cover the building massing. Then we'll pause. We'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about the specimen tree of preservation.
Thank you, Giano. Again, I'm Alex David with Calvin Giordano. I'm the Director of Planning. Sorry? Really close. Yeah, I'm the Director of Planning for Miami-Dade for the firm. And actually, last week was my 37th anniversary as a planner in Miami-Dade County. So I've been around a long time. So we're very glad to be here today. So part of this presentation was given at the planning board. So we, added to that presentation. So there are some similar slides and statements in this presentation that the same as what we gave in October. So as we have on the screen, and I'm going to be looking at my paper presentation because it's a little off. So we have the issue is, what is the issue? We're going to discuss that, why we're doing this. And we've heard you loud and clear. We know why we need to do some changes to the land development regulations. How will it get done? We've changed definitions or proposed changes to definitions in your code. That allows us to get to the desired result. So we I looked at a number of codes that I thought could be beneficial for our review. And they're listed, they're listed Golden Beach, Bal Harbour, Key West, South Miami, and a few others. I was asked at the planning board to look at maybe El Portal, but they are very similar to yours. They don't really have or discuss articulation in their code. So that was an additional review, but we're sticking to what we list here. And then the next couple of slides are just showing these municipalities and what they do with respect to a second floor setbacks. So again, these are just their zoning codes, and there's some graphics in here to show you all what they are describing in the code.
And if I may, let's not forget that we don't want to overregulate.
It's a tightrope.
It's a tightrope. Yeah.
So that's why we looked at certain codes and stayed away from others. So Golden Beach and Bal Harbour, they're pretty similar, and so they step back for every foot above 18 feet. So the second floors will always step back for much of the structure. We also looked at Key West, Miami Beach. Some of these are more prescriptive, so we were trying to again balance it between being very prescriptive and not. In South Miami, they basically have the same type of setbacks for the second floor, but in their lot coverage regulations, for every 1,000 square feet of lot size, they bump up or they bump down, I guess, the maximum lot coverage. So it's very prescriptive. I mean, they have, I think, 20 lines in their lot coverage code dealing with different lot sizes. So it's very prescriptive and somewhat difficult to understand. So that's something we would like to stay away from.
The impact of some of these strategies.
Right. Right.
They use a proportional relationship. The higher the building, the more setback. That makes it much more complex. And it doesn't enforce everything. Ultimately, what we're someone not without making it so formulaic and really understand.
Thank you, Gianna. Um, Right, but your minimum setback, front setback is 25. Yeah. I thought it was 20, I'm sorry, which 30, I'm sorry. It's 30, I forget, and this rear setback's 15, correct? 10, okay, I'm sorry, I do deal with too many cities, so sorry. Yeah, but we were charged, the issue is, for the most part, yeah, we could look at front and rear setbacks if, if that's the desire, but, our charge was the side setbacks and the building massing and blank walls and other things. That's the main issue in many cities. Right, I mean, right, right.
What? Okay.
I think that that's definitely something that start to, if there is an appetite, for example, then we have to be, then we start with and then the smaller the footprint of the building, we add that together, flood elevation, start pushing the building up. The raising of the building plus the additional height, we're trying to balance which ones of those are.
Thank- yeah. Just for clarification, for those who were on Zoom, an initial question that was brought up here at the log cabin was with regards to the setbacks in the front of the property. If you all don't mind, what I'd like to do to make sure that we kind of keep everything moving along, let us finish this phase of the presentation and then we'll address any questions or comments. And if anybody in the audience here in the log cabin wishes, I would just ask that they go to the mic so that those on Zoom and even for the recording, so that anybody who wishes to look at the meeting afterwards, they can pick up what you're saying as well, because that's a great question. And I wanted to make sure that everybody understood what they were addressing when they were talking about the front setbacks. Thank you, everybody.
So the last code that we'll discuss at this point is Indian Creek Village. I wrote that zoning code, and we were, obviously it's a different community, very large lots, either 80,000 or 40,000 square feet for the most part, large volumes. But again, we decided to be less prescriptive in that case, but we still want the articulation of the residences. So yeah, they have, wider setback, side setbacks, larger lots, but it's the same issue. So, so that's again, a less prescriptive. So some of these slides in here or photos were from the planning board that I took. This house, it's a great house, and most of you probably know it. It's at 96th and 10th Avenue in Miami Shores. And I never realized, I mean, most of the house is really well articulated, but go to the east side of the house and you get the blank wall, which is shocking to me. But it's a great house, well articulated, but there's this one side with just one window and 2 stories. So it kind of, to me, looks out of place. So, we need to look at all sides of all structures, not just 3 out of the 4. So yeah, just wanted to throw that one in there because of just, the way it looks, and it is at a prominent corner.
Right, and that may be an appropriate treatment for two-story.
Right. These are a couple pictures I took in Belmead. So obviously the one on the left is highly articulated, but is that a design feature that you would want in the village? Again, this is a single family home at 77th on 77th Street in Belmead. Very articulated on all four sides, but very modern.
Yeah, what's interesting about the image of that is that you don't really know what the funny thing that we're going to be discussing
And actually, that's a good point. The front door, the front steps, stairs, and front door are on the avenue side. So they're between the white portion of the structure and the rust, whatever, red brick. Yeah. So so it's kind of an odd situation, but it's still, like I said, this is articulated. The residence on the right is also in Belmead. Again, this is maybe items that we need to discuss and maybe avoid blank walls on the front of structures.
yeah, the most prominent
Whoops.
thing on notice that the garage is first and then
Right. So these are just other, a brand new home, a residence on the right, on the left in Miami Beach. It's very articulated. And then a more historic residence on the right. And you could see the second floor. There are windows, but there's some articulation and movement. It's not just a straight blank wall. Couple other examples, as Jono said, the residence on the right, which is Miami Shores, where's the front door? The most prominent feature is three garage doors. The actual front door of the home is on the left of the car. So again, this is something that we think should be avoided, the prominence of garages. And then we'll, as Jono said, we'll talk about that. Right. And another point is, you're unique in, in municipalities, like every house is different, basically. There's so many architectural styles that the vice mayor actually in his presentation months ago, or was it last year? I can't actually remember, but it's been quite a while. But in his presentation, he showed a variety of styles in the village. And that's very admirable that way back when it was developed like as such. Oops. Okay, so a couple of examples of what we would try to avoid in this exercise: these blank walls, windows basically looking into the next home. So, we will also discuss that. So there's just a couple examples. Again, this is just from our meeting in October, what we heard from the planning board. Looking at the site setbacks again, articulation strategy, make it clearly defined, easy to read for architects, residents, everyone. It has to be user friendly. Whatever proposed changes, they need to be, as I said, user friendly. And we're recommending not to be overly prescriptive, because that could lead to monotony, as John has said. So a couple of our recommendations, sidewalls allowed to build to the side setback line. You know, right now, what it is you're allowed to have windows and doors on the sides of properties, which would, you know, allow residents to look into the next door neighbors. So we're trying to avoid that.
So you are allowed two stories, right? So what we looked at was, you know, it makes sense to allow for because generally you can
Landscaping, right?
right, and landscaping that buffer. However, on the second one, that's where you have over into somebody's yard.
Right. And obviously, I wanted to go back to one of your slides that you showed. There were townhouses, but I don't know if you noticed there was a circular stair in the rear to go up to the third floor. So that's even worse. You have a outside stairway looking right into someone's backyard. So, you know, so these are the things that we really, I think, need to avoid. So again, we're looking at mostly the second floor. How do you articulate that level? And it is, you know, articulate, but also prohibit looking into the neighbors. And that was, you know, we heard that loud and clear. For the remaining 2/3 of the structure, look at stepping back a certain number of feet per height. It's just a ratio. A lot of municipalities handle it that way. So I think that would be one of our recommendations. Again, it's about privacy, and we heard that loud and clear.
So what this does is that this gives us flexibility. The rear 2/3 and the rear 2/3 of the building then has a second story articulation as an additional step back that's proportional to the height that they're providing. Whereas the front of the building, which is where you would have your public spaces within the interior programming of the building, that can be brought up to the property line, but those cannot have windows looking into an interior side setback. So then we're really only sort of limiting that ability only on that first third portion. Now, remember, what we're going to show you what the maximum build out of that could look like, but that's a maximum build out. You still have to incorporate what the wants and needs of the property owner wants, how much space they're going to build out, the pervious requirements, and all that stuff. That's just the big box, right?
Can I ask you a really quick question?
Sure.
You've said a couple of times interior side setback for windows and things. So that would be different on a corner property where
Correct.
it's not interior and there's no building next to them.
Correct. So one of the things that you'll note, one of the things that you'll note is that also, if you have balconies, then balconies will not be allowed on an interior side setback, because those are opportunities where people can come out and literally have just full clear view into somebody else's property. So we will want them to put the balconies either on the front and on the rear. However, if they put them on the front, they can't put them on the front and wrap the balcony around to look into a property. They would still have to find a way of obscuring a visibility so that it's still ensuring some level of privacy. And what we've done is that when we look at the recommended language, we've tailored the language so that it's really more about the relationship, so that then the folks on the planning board can have some leverage to be able to provide comment and feedback to the applicants to sort of guide the design in a way that works best, given the contextual relationship within which the new building is going to go in. So ultimately, this is what the massing is going to look like. And it's a little difficult to see on the screen, but you'll note that the first third of the building is up against the property line, but the second third is pushed back. Okay, so there's a little bit of articulation there. Again, this is the big box. Within that is where you would actually get whatever articulation and building you would have.
So as we reviewed the code, there are a number of conflicts, and this is just one, we want to point out. You're prohibiting single level roofs, flat roofs, but then in the same section, you're talking about allowing two or more roof levels when a flat roof is constructed. So that's a little disconnect there. So we looked at definitions, again, how to establish height. And so this is, what we're talking about here, setting the height of structures, but also allowing, for other things to exceed the height, cupolas, chimneys, et cetera. And one of the recommendations that we came up with, and Gianna and I discuss this, the maximum height of a story. So there's just no regulation in there dealing with that. So, and I think in some cities that's an issue, allowing 14, 16 foot, ceiling heights, when you have a maximum of, say, standard is 35-foot structures. Your, maximum height of a single family is typically in a lot of codes 35 feet. So this kind of avoids and brings the structure down a bit. Again,
No. So actually, why don't we go back, because I think that this is an important sort of concept that I think that we want to talk about, which is, one, we want to clarify if flat roofs, and that's something that we want to get some feedback from you on, is in this conflict in the code, do we want to allow flat roofs or do we not want to allow flat roofs? I think that's something that we want to discuss. We've also identified that if anybody wants to provide any distinctive architectural treatments, such as chimneys, cupolas, architectural sort of parapeting, just to give it some level of stylistic quality, that can exceed the maximum height by 3 feet, but it cannot have more than 10% of the overall aggregated footprint. So it cannot take up 50% of the property, right? The discussion about the stories, I think, is really critical, because that's how we start to, with reason, limit what the maximum height of the ultimate build out is going to be. So we've sort of defined the heights in ways so that then somebody cannot come in and do a 16-foot, 18-foot, or 20-foot story for 2 stories, which ends up with a 40-foot building, but you actually get a maximum 24-foot tall building, plus whatever the FEMA height elevation is that we're going to be looking at. So ultimately, we think that this impacts the scale of the village, which works twofold. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about the trees issue, but the taller the building, the more likely it is that they're going to be in conflict with one of these mature branches that may already exist that overhangs some of the buildings. So it's also to our benefit to minimize the amount of conflicts that mature canopy can have with future development.
so again, there's some definitions that are not in the code that we feel we need to, clarify and have in your definitions section. So the lot coverage, open space, and grade are some of the definitions that we, are typical of codes. So we want to, clarify what is covered by each one of those definitions. So again, this is a repeat, obviously, of the previous slide, but again, orientation is very critical. The front of the house should be facing towards the main street, whatever it is. If it's a corner, whatever. But on a typical street, let's make sure that where the front of the house is and the front door. So this is just recommended language that that we would discuss and typically work into your code. And the second bullet, when the garage is provided, that statement, what we're recommending here is make the primary facade of the house, the front door and windows, not the garage as in this case. So
It's
lot
the
of those have-
opposite.
right,
It's the
the
opposite of
opposite.
that Belle Meade image,
Right.
right? It's not tucking the entrance of the home back behind the garage. Is making that front and center, and then pushing the wall plane of the garage a minimum of 5 feet back, so that then that's not the most prominent thing.
and a number of codes have that. Miami-Dade County, some of their zoning districts have very similar language. And, so the front door is there and the garages are in the back. When you're looking down the street, you're not seeing a wall of garages, which, we're proposing that should be avoided.
Are you saying that in municipalities where they have that language, it's required, the garage is required to be set farther back than the front door? Or
Yes.
can it be in the same plane as the front door?
Well, it depends on the zoning district, in Miami-Dade County, it's not in all zoning districts, but sometimes they allow, in some districts they'll allow that flat wall, but in other districts, it's pushed
Required
back.
to set back.
Yeah, and it's a better look for the community and allows a little more landscaping in the front. Again, we spoke about articulation, no flat walls. So we're recommending, language that, as this proceeds and it's further discussed, what is best for the village. And that's why we're here to listen to you to determine what course we should actually take.
Yeah, so that first bullet describes a relationship that then empowers the planning board to be able to have leverage to sort of guide that that articulation, which it basically says that it's that there's a goal and an intent to accentuate the visible aspect of the different parts of the building so that the different volumes of the building can be legible. And the second one is that issue of articulation, particularly to restrict the amount of single plane wall surface to 600 square feet. So that the architect will quantify that wall plane, and for every 600 square feet, they would have to do a minimum amount of offset in that plane so that you don't get these blank walls that we're seeing in the image. And 2 foot seems like a reasonable amount because it casts enough shadow that it allows the volume to feel a little bit more broken down. This will essentially sort of catalyze, we think, through a design process that the architects can better articulate what that volume looks like.
What is our current code on the setback on those walls?
So-
Isn't it 10 feet?
Right now, you have a 10-foot setback with no regulation for articulation.
This number that you just showed, I'm sorry if you could back up one slide, the 600 square foot max that is in your recommended language, is that based on the average lot depth that you're looking at? Because we have lots of different sizes. Or
Correct.
is this where when municipalities do this, do they have a flat number regardless of the size of the lot?
Would
Or is it relative to the lot size somehow?
No, so the way that we looked at it was the 600-foot number seemed like a reasonable one to achieve a minimum of 1 to 2 articulations within the build out of the kind of volumes that we're seeing done here. Every municipality is different. If you have larger lots, then you can accommodate larger numbers because it's less impact on the property. Here, it's really about balancing the nearness of the buildings to each other and the ultimate build out that this does. So this is not a prohibitive or onerous regulation because it allows for an articulation essentially of about every 40 or 50 linear feet of depth, which is pretty reasonable.
And the village is lucky because you do actually have greater setbacks, side setbacks than most communities. Most communities are 5 or 7.5. So I know 2.5 feet, but it's still greater than many communities.
Yeah.
So that's a very positive thing, I think. Jono, I'm gonna make you do a calculation. What do you think that wall is? We're talking about 600 feet, but that's probably much greater because it's probably more than 30 feet.
Correct,
right?
correct.
So
Yeah.
could be 800 or
Yeah.
40 by 20 maybe, or whatever. So you know, this would be greater than the 600 square feet that is being proposed.
So we're going to get to sort of open the floor now for questions and answers and feedback on this issue. But the one thing that I do want to just go back really quick, just to make sure that we don't glaze over it, is something that we're providing as a recommendation that that we think can have great impact. Right now, there's no real definition for what height is. There is a maximum allowable of 2 stories. Right? Some municipalities measure height from the average crown of road, which means that you measure the crown of road, and then from the crown of road, that establishes the height. Some properties measure height from the finished grade adjacent to the property or the average finished grade. What we're recommending is that we go with the more prevalent definition for height that a lot of municipalities are taking on, which is to establish it from base flood elevation +1. And this is in response to adaptability and resiliency to issues of climate change. As the FEMA flood elevation and insurance maps change, you don't want to be in a position where you have to constantly be going back and updating your code, redefining what height is. So what this does is that this establishes the height concurrent with what those flood maps are, so that they're always in the most, you always end up with product that is the most resilient as possible, okay? It is important to note though that you don't control where FEMA establishes their base elevation. So if the average elevation of your grade right now is at, say, 3 feet, and FEMA establishes it at 5.5, then we're saying 5.5 plus 1, that's 6.5. That means that the property, the ground floor of the properties have to be elevated from that 3 to that 5.5. I'm losing my math, to that 5.5. And then the building starts at that point. So it's the maximum of 24 feet of those two stories, plus whatever the FEMA elevation is. And that can have an incredible impact on the neighborhood quality of the streets, because now the buildings no longer feel as approachable as possible, which is why we think it's important to make those emphasis, to push the front of the buildings. I mean, to push the primary entrances to the foreground, set the garages back, so that then you can maintain as much of a presence on the street as possible. I just wanted to go back just to make sure that we understood that that's a recommendation that we're making that could have an impact overall on the village.
Great. Thank you, Jono. And just on that, I work for many cities, and you know, this is an issue, the crown of the road issue. Well, in one municipality, it's the maximum height of a residence is 35 feet from the average crown of the road. Well, wonder if now FEMA or whatever else requires you to, you know, start your residence at 8 feet. So then you're losing that differential. So, you know, it's problematic. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, and I think I talked about this at planning board, what I call the Key Biscayne effect. And this is again what Jenna was alluding to. After Hurricane Andrew, Miami-Dade County required, you know, new houses that were built or, you know, redeveloped to be raised a number of feet. So you'd had houses down here, houses up here, and what happened? The water drained to the next door neighbors. So this is why we're discussing this. It's very important to get it right. So in all new development.
Thank you very much.
We learned from those problems, you know,
Thank you very much, Alex. Just to set some parameters for the Q&A and the comments, unlike the commission meeting, we don't tend to track how many minutes someone is talking. I just ask that you please be courteous to those who are here and on Zoom. You're not restricted from only coming up once. So, and I've never restricted that in any of our town halls. So if you want to just ask a question, give someone else an opportunity, a new question pops into your mind and you want to get back on the microphone, that's totally fine. I just ask that please don't take up 10, 15, 20 minutes so that others can also get their questions and comments out. And then you can always come back as well, like I mentioned. I'll be monitoring the Zoom in case there's any questions, but if anybody here in the audience wishes to make a comment before the commission goes into any of their questions or comments, just approach the microphone and ask. Thank you, everybody.
I like it up here. Hi, Art Gonzalez, 10926 Griffin Boulevard. Two things I just wanted to point out. Number one, we talked a lot about the sides of these buildings and the articulation and whatnot. But for me, even more important is the rear. And the reason for that is because it's personal. The reason we sold our house on Miami Beach is because they built one of these things. And they built a giant wall behind our pool was there, and the windows and the balconies were literally just overlooking our backyard. And I would come out every morning and I would look at that thing that looked like Walgreens, and I said, that's it, we gotta leave. So we bought a house here on the canal, and that way no one could ever build anything else. So unless they fill in the canal. So that's the first point. And the second point, the question that I have is in regards to current structures, right? So if somebody wants to build a house on a current, where their current house currently exists, right? They just want to put a second story. How is that even possible architectural wise, as far as the articulation to moving walls in, right? When you already have a pre-existing building that's already there. That part, I don't understand how that's even possible. But I think that's something that we need to talk about because I don't know how you would do that.
Yeah, I think that so to the first comment about the rear, we do recognize that you have a very shallow rear setback, which really pushes those buildings really close to somebody else's backyard when they're butted up against each other. So yeah, we can definitely look at the articulation on the second floor relative to the rear. We are going to have to balance that against the taking of rights and stuff. So we'll take a look at that. With respect to a renovation of an existing building, that's really that's going to require an architectural solution where they may have to actually cut back on portions of the ground floor to build a structural component if they need to cantilever or step back a portion of the second story or add a column. So those are structural engineering and architectural solutions that the architect would have to come up with. Those challenges, again, are good ones to have because it forces the architects to be more innovative as possible. The last thing you want is to make it so easy that then just prop up a second wall and you end up with a blank wall. So we don't necessarily see it as a negative thing.
Eric Huel, 777 Northeast 111th Street. We have a number of renovations where there's been a two-story element added to the back of a one-story building. And it's extremely awkward, ugly. The roofs are not tied in. You create this valley between the first story building and the second story building. Is there going to be any attempt to address that?
Yes, based on the comments that we're hearing, we're definitely going to look at the rear articulation as more. Part of our focus was to look at those side relationships because those were the ones that were the most concerning. I think that one way of doing it is not only looking at articulation, but also instructing applicants where to position or encourage them to position their open space on the rear side of the property so that then that pushes the buildings away from the rear setback line. So that way, again, we're not being so overly prescriptive. We're simply just laying out a series of relationships similar to how you do in a design guidelines that then the planning board can have some leverage to use that to sort of massage the designs as they come before them to get a better product.
We have a lot of renovations, and I think if we're going through this exercise,
Yeah.
it would be an oversight not to look at that. The second thing is, I noticed in section 10.3, it says that there would be an additional 1 foot setback for each additional 2 feet of height. What's the starting point? It doesn't define it.
It would be from the top of this, of the first story. So the first story, if we go back to the way that we're recommending it, is that, let me see, So you would start from the second story, you would start to count back. So if we go back to the image of how it was measured in Golden Beach, they have a one-to-one relationship, right? So for every foot of height, they push back a foot. So that in your case, that can amount to a setback of as much as 12 feet. Which starts to be a little bit more on the onerous side. So what we're doing is that for every 2 foot of height, then you push back 1 foot. So that gives you a maximum setback of that second story of 6 feet, which we think is sort of a good balance of not being too onerous and achieving some level of setback. If the desire of the community is to push that as much as possible, then we can increase those proportions as needed. Yeah.
I guess it's okay if you like cigarettes. The last thing is I do agree entirely with the idea of setting the first floor level at the flood level. It's just common sense to do that. And certainly, regardless of the relationships to the other properties, it really has to be done. I'd be short-sighted not to do that. That's it. Thanks.
I do think it's important just to highlight that these regulations are only regulating the maximum potential build out. It doesn't mean that every building is going to have the same exact setbacks, right? So we're not encouraging or forcing anyone to do this in a prescriptive manner. We're simply just saying it cannot get nearer than a certain amount.
Barbara Kuehl, just to follow up with what Gary was saying, it's an older community. A lot of houses have a garage where people, when they decide to add on a bedroom, they'll put it above the garage. And with the setbacks, like Gary said, having setbacks of 6 feet, if it was a 12-foot structure, is, if you are trying to build that, you'd never be able to line up things, the electrical, plumbing. I mean, it would make it almost impossible to do. And it would, to me, it would look like a layer cake effect. One of the things you keep referring to is the Planning and Zoning Board. I think they do a great job, but they're not a design review board. And I feel like you're putting a lot of authority in their hands. And honestly, if I were building a house, we don't even have an architect on the board. We have residents. These are not, it's not a design review board. And I think we need to have regulations that guide a good looking house, and they have some input, but I don't like the idea of them having that type of control. And I think that's kind of a dangerous, you can have 5 people who love a Tuscan villa, and they're always going to fight whatever somebody else is putting in. And also the garage, you keep pushing the garages set to the back of the house. We have small lots generally, and sometimes you just can't do something like that. And if you can do it, fine, but I wouldn't like to see that as a mandate. And also the houses that are existing that are being renovated, some of them are doing pretty deep renovations. The garage is already set in the front. So what happens then? Do they have to comply with?
It would be grandfathered in. And just for clarity, we're not asking to push the garages to the back of the property.
Well, I mean, behind the front wall.
Yeah.
It's with the type of lots we have and the type of landscaping, there could be a problem not using more or less the existing area that the driveway and garage was in before. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. David Raymond, 11520 Northeast 9th Avenue. So a couple of things. I didn't hear any reference to corner lots. So our lot, not that we're thinking of doing anything, we were actually, but we have a corner lot, so the setback becomes 30 feet on both the front and the side of the property. So, for example, we were thinking about seriously considering putting a pool in, and the place we wanted to put it, unfortunately, is on the side, and we can't do that. I think as you look at this stuff, and when we bought the house, we didn't really have the intention of doing it, so that's that's on me. Had I looked at that, I think that maybe I would have said, well, maybe I don't want to buy this house if I really want a pool. I think if you're doing this for future reference and development, this may eliminate some people from coming in here. Maybe that's the intention. I don't know, but somebody may want to come in and build a house a certain way, and then you come before this board and they say they don't like this and they don't like that. And I agree with Barbara's comments, by the way, about putting this all in the hands of one single board. Not that Gage, they do a great job and they're very helpful. I just think they're doing everything from paint colors to now you're going to do designs, and what happens if they have a different idea than the architect. So just those kinds of things to consider. The other thing is, I know you're going to talk about trees next. So I am a member of the Parks and Parkway Board. We haven't talked about this plan that's coming up here. I don't know what it's going to be. I haven't read anything yet. It would be nice to be consulted with these things. I just say this personally. If there is something like this coming here, and we do have a board like that it would have come in front of the board just for some input or whatever.
The manager did at the introduction said that from a procedural standpoint, we went to planning board, we're here tonight, and then the next step is to go to Parks and Parkway.
Okay, I'm
So-
sorry.
so
I was.
There
I
is
was
the
late, so-
intention. Yeah, there is absolutely the intention of roping you guys in.
Okay, and so just in the context of that, I think the other thing, I'm using my house as an example because I think it's a good example of a Biscayne Park home and yard. We have one of the oldest oak trees in the village in our backyard. When we talk to the swimming pool people, they're like, well, if you really wanted to, you could take that out. I'm like, oh my God, it's just like a crime against humanity
Correct.
and nature. I was like, you could
Correct.
never do that. But in the future, somebody could come in and do that. I would hope not. I would hope maybe one day, our kids live in the village, maybe they would take the house and they would never do that to the tree. But I would hope that nobody would ever be able to do that to the tree unless it really were diseased or something happened. So I'm just throwing that out there that I hope that's considered in all of this. 'cause
100%.
I see a lot of trees gone and a lot of big new concrete driveways, those big rectangles with little grass or even astroturf between it. I don't know how we allow astroturf between it, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey guys, my name's Jake Murphy. I just purchased 11153 Griffin Boulevard, so new to here, but been down here for a little while and own some property in some other cities. Barbara, I want to resonate what you said. I think some of the points that you hit on was very well articulated. It sets a very dangerous precedent to be able to go down avenues where we give a board that's a government entity to be able to dictate what someone can do on their property. I'm probably one of the few that exist in Biscayne Park, but I sit on a 26,000 square foot lot. So I don't have some of the nuances that maybe someone else would experience, but with that, we're starting to now get into subdivision and we're starting to affect values of property at that point. I'm 31 years of age. I am probably the next generation that comes through here, and I mean zero disrespect with that, but we architecturally have a different view. People, like, no one wears puffy dresses anymore, and men don't have mustaches and mullets. Things change, trends change. And with that, we have to be responsible. I'm not saying that we have to sit here and have a sugar cube on every single lot, but my architectural view of what I think is a nice property is going to be very different to the next person. And generational change is something that we have to be very, very cognizant of here. Because what my view is of something that's nice, and I'm going to probably be a minority in this conversation, what my view is nice. And another gentleman said that he moved from Miami Beach because he could see someone else's backyard. That's why I purchased a 26,000 square foot lot. But when it comes to, I look at everything as how this is a business opportunity for me as much as it is my personal residence. At the end of the day, if things hit the fan and I had to sell or I had to diversify my assets, you're affecting my ability to be able to subdivide, to be able to go up, to be able to do that. whilst like I'm from Australia, our setbacks are very, very tight and it's not pretty. You're up against in housing villages or housing estates next to that same person. So where is that delicate line? It's really, really hard. The other thing that that you hit on was how are we not going to have these guidances to be so stringent? And who sets what that stringibility is? So how do we dictate that as a community to make sure that everyone has an equal say and an equal future say? Because we're affecting, again, generational aspect of what this is. The last part that I had here, I can't even read my own writing. The front and back setbacks. So we talked about, Barbara talked about the garage. That's really hard to achieve on some of those aspects. That's something that Miami as a whole doesn't necessarily have parking, or people convert their garages into livable space to be able to maximize what their square footage is. If you look at the averages, you need 2,500 square feet as a minimum, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom to hit that special mark on a resale. People turn their garages in. I personally like a garage, but architecturally it can look good, but how do we find what that common ground is? So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Jake, I missed your address. Jake, I missed your address when you said it. What is it? 11153. You're right here next to the church. Welcome to Biscayne Park.
Hi, good evening, or good afternoon, sorry. Gage Hartung, 1029 Northeast 114th Street. I just wanted to kind of go to the first part of which was brought up, which is the front and rear setbacks. That is something that the board, the P&Z did, suggest you look at, part of the vertical walls, which I know you're talking about articulation in that diagram that you had. Actually, the front should be considered that, and then also as well as the rear property lines, because we do have a lot of corner lots that have 10-foot setbacks in the rear. So that articulation where it's their rear side, rear line, but it's their neighbor's side. So that really should be considered. That again, that was recommendation. I do like the language that was written in Indian Creek. I think that was an actual, it's a good model that we could maybe consider. I know you're looking at all of them, but that's something that I thought was really good. I don't really agree with the use taking rights, Gianna.
No, we don't want to.
Yeah,
we don't want
you
to.
keep referring to that we are taking people's rights, but it's really not. It's just adding building requirements that you have to stay within. Taking rights is like you can't have a second story. You can't have this. We're saying that you could still have all the rights you can. It's just you're tweaking them basically.
Yeah.
So that term kind of jumped out at me. With the second story, and you mentioned an exterior staircase. Maybe we should add something about not having third floor decks, because that is something that people can actually do. They can. It's not technically a story, but they could go up there and stand and
Correct.
have a party and overlook their neighbors. So maybe that's something to look with. I know I have a lot of other notes that I wanted to get to, but I guess I could reserve my time and come back up. At the 12-foot heights, I think that's something that's a really good dimension. Again, the base floodplain. What is our floodplain here? I think we're at 9, isn't it? So like we're average 7, and I think the flood is about 9. So it would be good to know what that is before we make that decision, because if there's this huge buildup that's going to end up on every new structure, that's something that we might want to consider too.
Yeah, we'll get the flood maps.
Having that number. Architectural elements, defining them a little bit better than antennas, and we don't really want antennas on top of houses or flagpoles on top of houses. The 12-foot height, love the idea of the front facade facing the street, and also the garage. Articulation is a good point. The way you have it set now, I'm just concerned that that diagram that you showed, you know, you could end up with a box next to another box and it basically would be one of your photographs. So we need to like maybe consider that 1/3 maybe be part of the front or something so that we don't end up having 10-foot setback,
Gotcha.
2-story box,
Yeah.
10-foot setback, 2-story box.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the entire primary purposes of writing this code.
Yeah, I think that so from our articulation purpose, the way that we wrote the language is that we're saying that all facades need to be articulated. So it's not just the side, also the front and the rear needs to be articulated. We haven't necessarily put those threshold numbers for what those, and we can definitely take a look at that to break down those volumes.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. We're gonna sort of incorporate that.
Going to the roof design definitions,
Mhm.
we do allow flat roof houses in the park, but the way that it is written, it's delineating, you can't have a single one level flat roof, but you can have a flat roof as long as it has different levels that is defined in number 2. So it has to
Gotcha.
have 2 or more levels. So
Gotcha.
basically, it might be worded wrongly, weirdly, but you are allowed to have flat roof houses. They just can't be all single 1-story flat tops. Yeah, but it's their roofs that are articulated in different heights. Yeah.
Right, so we'll make that clarification in the code because the way that it is written, I think leaves it up for a little bit of room of interpretation. So we'll make some recommendations on clarification on that, just to make sure that that is abundantly clear.
Yeah. And just to speak to, I mean, the way I'm reading this is that you're giving parameters to the planning board. You're not actually saying, okay, planning board, you can say, you can't have this, you can't have
Correct.
this, you can't have that. You're just like that definition. This is the box that
Yes.
the residents have to stay
Yes.
within. And it's up to the planning board to make sure whatever is submitted by the architect stays within that box.
Correct,
Okay?
correct,
We're not being architectural reviews or anything like that. We're just
correct,
architects stay within this guideline.
yeah,
And then, that's how it works. So,
correct.
Thank you.
No, thank you. All right, so, okay.
Barbara Kuehl. I'm not really sure what this workshop is for. It sounds like you're making your little tweaks and then you're going to bring back a code. Is that the process? Or
Yes.
that to me, that's not much of a workshop because you have a few residents putting in some input and there are a lot of things that I think you're over regulating. You keep talking about not wanting to be too prescriptive. I think this is too prescriptive. And you're actually, it's not much of a community workshop if you're just making the changes and you're going to go ahead and bring it back. Sorry.
We're listening to you today and the commission. This is how every process works. I mean, it's up to the commission to guide us at the end.
Yeah,
And
there
then we
was a-
go back and change the code.
There was a time when this village was grown up enough to sit in a room, have people talk things back and forth, have a couple of workshops alone. We didn't need a PowerPoint. I mean, I'm sorry, it's not anything against you. This is something that you were asked to do. But you get it, we've done this with fences, with parking, with a million different things, very complicated issues where the community was very divided. And by hashing things out, not having it this formal, not having it this quick, we ended up with a code and codes that covered difficult issues very easily. You know, we had a good result and people brought different points of view. This to me is tweaking. Thank you.
You. All right, so we have no other comments, and what we'll do is that we'll move on. Oh, sorry, the commission.
I want-
apologize.
I wanted to thank you for your hard work and listening to people, and the commission is not ready to vote on this. It will be coming back to the community. I'm sure it will be posted on our website. I'm sure Mario will be putting stuff out to the community so we can get input from people, because I think it's very important that we get input, and I don't think we're rushing it through. I'm very, very happy to have the professional input from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to point out there, is a sign-in sheet over there. So if anyone would like to request additional information as we go through this process, please write your name and email down, and then the village manager, obviously, you're going to be taking comments too. So, we just want to get as many people involved as possible. And one way is to have your name and email so we could, get the word out even more.
Great, to move on. Oh, sorry. Do we
Yeah,
have-
before we move on, I know a couple of the commissioners wanted to speak as well.
Okay, I just have a quick question, but first, thanks for doing this for us, guys. We really appreciate it. This is a big topic that we decided to tackle, and we appreciate having your professional perspective on it before we consider anything, and we're certainly not making any changes to it right now. This is part of a longer process. I have one question. So I appreciated hearing you talk about, the balance that we're looking to strike to not overregulate and be too restrictive. In terms of the second story requirements, and you talk about articulation in the second story stepping back, I don't have an opinion on this. I just want to ask you a question. In regards to not limiting creativity and people wanting, straight walled structures, do communities do anything else to address the second stories other than stepping the second story back? For example, if an architect or a resident, wants a straight walled structure or a more modern contemporary look, do communities do anything like allowing that, but requiring a greater setback for the first story so they can have the style they want and also maintain some kind of a privacy for the neighbors? Is that a possibility?
Yes, and in fact, they can still achieve that with the language that we're proposing. If they just want a full 2-story height wall, they simply just have to push the building further away from
The setback.
to match the second story setback.
Okay.
And then
they-
at that point, they can get
Okay,
it.
so they use the same second story setback
Correct.
language, but it's for the entire structure.
Correct.
And if that was in here, I missed that, so I apologize. But is that what's going to be in your recommendation to us?
Yes, and that's sort of inherent in the way that we've drafted the language.
Okay.
It is something that the architects, when they read the code, they will understand that that is something that they would have to
Okay.
do in order to be able to achieve that.
Because I just don't want to limit any kind of creativity, and I do agree that people should be able to have some, a great amount of latitude in what the design of their home is, while also taking into consideration our concerns as a community.
100%.
Okay,
And that's
thank you.
why we also are not recommending any regulations on stylistic quality. Different municipalities, depending on the context, will say the building has to be X or Y type of style. Or some municipalities will say, if you design it in this style, then you have these additional building rights. We're not doing that. We're saying, build what you want, just don't build it to a size and a scale that is incompatible with the sensitivity of the context.
So you'll maintain, in the presentation that we looked at when we first had our conversation, I included all those pictures of different styles. So you feel that the language that and again, we're not considering anything here today, but you are confident that what you will be presenting to us won't in any way limit their style choices. It will just make their style choices conform with what we want overall.
Correct.
Okay, that's
Correct.
really important. Thank you very
Correct.
much.
Correct.
Not have that in your code now, and nor are we recommending the architectural styles at all. But do you want to bring up your window, what you were possibly the windows, the high windows?
Yeah, so for example, we understand that people need natural light. We, as humans, we do better when we see sunlight, right? So one of the provisions that we put in the language is that if you are going to build up against the property line, then you're not allowed windows, but you're all except for clear story windows. So these are windows that are up against the top of the building line, where are intended to allow natural light to come into the space, but you don't have people operating windows and looking into other people's property. So we've tried to balance that a little bit. Again, 100%, this is not about a stylistic prescriptive code. This is about building relationships in the code that allow for anybody to build whatever it is that they want to build, provided that it is to the scale and the volume that is sensitive to the character of the village.
So it's more of a mass conversation.
Correct, correct.
And I
John,
think
just-
it's also about preserving the rights of the people who are beside those properties and having the privacy that they've had for all their life living here.
And then to add on to what Mac was just saying, like, if you're going to go up and then we're talking about setting it back, but there's an original existing structure, I think we need to make sure there's enough language around the grandfathering of structure as well, because if I've got to demolish 3/4 of my property, it becomes then under either, if I think it's county code that you have percentages of demolition versus new build. So all of those regulations then have to come in. So I'm then having to spend significantly more money to then bring my house back up to current day code, whereas I was grandfathered in on a structure, but now I'm bringing in more septic, more electric, more plumbing, more mechanical. Like the cost is exponentially more at that point. We need to make sure there's enough language around the grandfathering laws and buildability and reasonability and practicality comes into all of that as well. So that's a huge part of that. Like, it's not just about the architectural view and the setbacks of what that is, but it does come down to like money. We are, I think one of you gentlemen said earlier that most, I think it's what, 90-something% of our taxation base here is residential. Yeah, so like I came from, I previously lived in Shaker Heights, Ohio, same setup. It was all residential, but the burden continually to be able to keep up with the economic hits of a community came from hitting the residents. You continue to put taxation up and up and up, and it becomes unavoidable and unaffordable. Urban sprawl becomes then an issue. We want to be an inclusive community, I'm assuming. I know I do, but like we've got to think about being able to welcome people in and not always just pushing people out. So,
Yeah. And that's why it's important to not be overly prescriptive in the code. And that's why we've sort of taken that approach. We've written codes where we have prescribed everything down to the nearest foot and the nearest inch and all sorts of stuff. We're not doing that here, right? We are being very generous in sort of loosely defining the relationships, again, so that we can sort of foster as much innovation and context sensitivity as possible. Can we move on to trees, or does anybody else need to speak?
No, we can move on.
Okay. All right, so now let's talk about trees, which we think is one of the most distinguishing and one of the most beautiful and richest qualities that the village has that makes it so uniquely distinct from a lot of other communities in this area. So this is really about preserving the mature tree quality that you already have. We really briefly just want to talk about some of the benefit of the trees, only because we want to set the stage so that everybody can understand, especially those here and those at home, where our starting point is. And it's from the aspect that trees, especially mature trees, provide an incredible amount of benefits that are both financial and intangible to the community, but however are really measurable. So a lot of research has been done on the impact of trees on communities. And what we found is that from a social perspective, communities that have a lot of trees tend to have lower crime rates, and they tend to have healthier residents, particularly because the trees provide a lot of shade. They encourage people to go outside and walk. People tend to spend more time outside. So this is really about sort of it brings in an aspect of health and wellness to the tree conversation. Additionally, trees help with energy conservation. So we talked about the financial impact on the residents, not only from a development standpoint, but as you start to lose your tree canopy, your heat island effect starts to go up. You start to spend more money trying to cool your property. And that has a financial burden on each individual property owner. And some of the statistics is that just by providing shading, you can reduce your overall energy costs by as much as 50%. So that's really important. From an environmental standpoint, and we know that the commission has stated sort of a desire to be as environmentally sensitive as possible. it not only improves your air quality, but it also helps with your stormwater management strategy, because the tree roots, especially the larger trees, they start to suck up a lot of water that infiltrates into the ground, and it helps to alleviate potential flooding issues that could relate to overdevelopment if that ever happens. And of course, it helps with climate change. A lot of residents, a lot of designers out there, in fact, are misinformed, and they think that trees and palms are the same. And trees provide 5 to 8 times more carbon sequestration than a palm does. So we are being very deliberate to make sure that we do not call them palm trees. We just call them palms because they're not trees. They're actually members of the grass family. And they don't provide the level of environmental benefits, not through carbon sequestration and not through stormwater management and evapotranspiration in the way the trees do. And trees are one of those things where they gain value and they provide more benefits the older they are. They're the opposite of everything that you build. Everything that you build degrades over time. Your canopy and your trees improve over time, and they provide much more benefit. So they do have a financial impact to the point that they can increase property homes as much as 25% if you live on a tree-lined street. These are perception studies that have been conducted nationwide and are very well respected. We took some of the language that we had sort of recommended and edited to the planning board, and some of the feedback that we got from them was that our intent to preserve a lot of the canopy was perceived as a little bit too onerous, particularly when it came to some of the mitigation requirements that we were putting in place. There were some comments for us to sort of not be so overly prescriptive with the thresholds that we included. So we reduced the definitions of what limbs get impacted. They instructed us to look at opportunities to minimize the burden on the applicant to be able to remove a tree. They asked us to reduce some of the mitigation requirements because they said that the mitigation requirements were too high. And then they asked us to look at the fact that the contributions to a tree preservation fund for removals in lieu of mitigation were perceived as too cost prohibitive. So those were some of the feedbacks that we got from the planning board. However, I do want to sort of position those against some of our understanding of what the direction of commission was that it was to prioritize the preservation of existing mature canopy, that it was in fact to discourage the demolition of existing mature canopy, and that it was to in fact limit the over pruning of existing mature canopies limbs. So we are now at a position where our understanding, and some of the commissioners are here, will be here to either get an affirmation of these goals or to clarify if we were off the mark in our understanding. But from our understanding, that's where we are. And now we're trying to balance where we need to be in order to be able to facilitate some of the comments that we're getting.
I would like to add to that to allow people to remove an existing tree or limbs of trees that are deemed to be unsafe.
Yes.
Because this is where we've had some battles in this village, that people have had trees that have been deemed to be unsafe, that they're deteriorating, that the limbs could be falling and causing injury. And other people in this village get very upset that their neighbors are spending thousands of dollars to remove a tree. And most people don't spend that kind of money unnecessarily, but I want that to be a part of what comes to us, that we are allowed. I mean, I'm a physical therapist, and in my career, I could count on the number of people that have been injured from tree limbs that are quadriplegic, paraplegic, and brain injured. And tree limbs can be very dangerous if there's something unsafe about them, and that nobody should be forced to live in a precarious situation because somebody doesn't want a tree or tree limb to be taken care of.
And the state already allows for that, and we'll discuss that through the statute. Yeah.
It's my understanding that the commission's not to be giving you any direction today, that we're here more of a listening mode.
Correct.
So I think we should all kind of like relax on that for a second. We're here to listen to residents, and we'll have plenty of input later on this topic. But I want to make sure that if you go back a slide to where you talked about P and Z's recommendations, I want to make sure that that those are the recommendations or the comments that came from P and Z. And I also want to say to Mario that this is the section that you're sending to Parks and Parkways for some input as well, correct?
Absolutely.
Right. Could we also get the opinion of the ecology board on this? We have another board in the village that has expertise in this matter. And I think ecology, there are ecological, environmental impacts here as well. And I would value their input as well. So I'd like that to go through the board to come back to us, please.
So I think that our starting point is Florida statute that was adopted. And the Florida statute essentially says that local governments cannot prohibit the removal of trees or limbs or pruning if in fact there is an opportunity to document that there is a presence of danger to either persons or property. And that's an important sort of caveat that sort of satisfies the need for people to live in safe environments. And by virtue of that same requirement, the state adopted language that said that you cannot require in those circumstances any mitigation for anything that has been removed. So that's sort of our starting point. Our starting point is that you can basically not tell a property owner that they cannot remove a tree if it is a source of danger either to property or people.
I have a quick question about this particular one, number one, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but when they say that a property owner must obtain documentation from an arborist certified by the who are they supposed to give that documentation to? I mean, obviously they're hiring the arborist, right? And then paying the arborist, but they're supposedly obtaining documentation from this arborist. What do? Do they present it to somebody, or they?
We actually have that process built into, so we'll talk about that process in the presentation.
Okay.
Because yes, you are right now in your code, you have language in there that says that a tree permit shall be issued if Miami-Dade County issues a tree permit. Typically, whenever you're going to impact a tree or remove a tree, you have to get a permit from Durham at the county. What this does is that this puts the onus on the property owner to prove that it is a danger. It doesn't, the code doesn't embed itself into the process, right? So if you only went by the Florida statute, you could get the arborist report stating that it's a danger. But because of the way that the county is structured, you cannot just nilly-willy just go out and cut down the tree. You still have to go through that process with the county, right? So the county has made their accommodations in their tree process. Based on Miami-Dade County code, if you cut down a tree, say your neighbor cuts down a tree and you call the county and report them, they can come and they can fine you. You have to be able to demonstrate at that point after the fact that the tree was in fact a danger. And the county, the county prefers that to happen before the fact, not after the fact. So that's why they want you to go through that process. It is not very clear. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to build language in the code to clarify that process so that there is a chain of events that, and I've put together sort of flow diagram to talk about how we think that that'll happen and how we're recommending it.
I'm sorry, I need you to restate that because I'm confused because the state statute. I'm asking a question. I'm not giving an opinion or giving them direction, Judy. I'm asking them a question. It's very different. Relax. Explain that to me again, please. It says a local government, that would be us, and that would also be the county, wouldn't it?
Mhm.
May not require a permit for the removal of a tree.
Correct. They may not require a permit, but you still have to get the acknowledgement of them that it is a danger.
Right, and an
Correct.
arborist, but are they required to turn that over up front or if they're asked for it?
They're required to turn that up front based on the language. You have to submit that together with your application in order to get that level of
But
consideration.
it says that you can't require an application, so I'm confused. It says a local government cannot require an application, a notice, an approval, a permit, or anything for the touching a tree, basically, if the owner obtains documentation. So it sounds like if I have a tree and I want to remove it, and I get an arborist to say that tree's a danger to your property, that's all I have to have. I don't have to go, it doesn't sound like I have to go show that to anybody. But if they came to me and said, hey, why'd you touch that tree? I'd say, look, I have this piece of paper that
Mhm.
allows me to do it.
Yeah.
So there is no application, there is no permit, there is no process if you have that piece of paper in your hand.
Yeah, and the way that the county has done it is that they have included a process so that by virtue of verification, then they're basically telling you, yes, this is concurrent or this is not a concurrent. For some reason, the county's attorneys have not sort of stricken that process down, maybe because it hasn't been challenged in court at this point. So we're sort of piggybacking on that as a way of stop gapping the opportunity for somebody to arbitrarily decide that they're going to cut down a tree.
Very good. Hey, Judy, you're clear that we're allowed to ask questions here and get clarification, right? Just want to make sure you're clear. I'm just making sure that you're clear. You can ask
Continue
questions
with
and get
the-
answers.
With the
to your questions
presentation.
without
I'd like
providing-
to hear from this resident, if you don't mind, because I think she has something that she'd like to share.
I'm Kate Davis. I'm also on the ecology board, and this is what I do for a living. I obtain tree permits. I'm an environmental consultant, and
No, it's on.
how Mac has
Yeah, it's working.
how Mac has explained it is actually correct. Out of courtesy, we tell residents, provide a notice to the municipality that has jurisdiction to regulate trees or to the county. But per this statute, you're not required to. It's as Mac said, if somebody came and said, why did you cut this tree down? And you provide the letter, that's all you need. So it's very open and it allows property owners a lot of rights of removing trees. So I just wanted to clarify that. I mean, obviously everybody does it differently, but right now, as far as I'm aware, Miami-Dade County does not have a process in place for verifying or providing verification of specimen tree removals on single private property.
No, they do have an application that you can go and you can give them the letter, and they'll verify, yeah, you got the letter. That's wonderful. If a property owner doesn't, and they're not necessarily required, but if Miami-Dade comes out, because it's happened here in the village, they will fine the property owner, and then the property owner has to go to the county to be able to provide them that letter, and then that is then closed and waived and all that kind of stuff. So it is a little bit of a roundabout how it happens with the county. It's always better to say, hey, here's a letter, and you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to pay for a permit. You don't have to get a permit. But it does kind of cover so that if someone does call saying, hey, this person just took down a massive oak tree, and they come out, they won't issue the fine because they already have that on record. But they do have that on their website and everything and the process. And it's happened here with a couple residents already as well.
But if they do it in violation, they're fined, but let's all be clear, the tree's gone.
And it's again, the key language within the statute is that the tree on a residential property puts the tree presents a danger to persons or property. Not every tree that's taken down presents that danger. So what I would request is if we can hold our comments and questions so that we can get through the presentation, because what we're picking at and what we're trying to set here is maybe some parameters for those trees that do not present the danger or persons where we can add that regulation. So if we can just kind of go through that, because I think some of the questions we're asking and it's the next slide, right? So if we can just kind of go through that and then we can come back to the questions and comments and we can have that discussion.
So we're going to get really technical into the language that we are already starting to sort of look at. Again, to sort of gauge as much reaction as we can. So some of the things that we need to define in the code that right now are not defined are definitions for a tree drip line, because that helps us understand the impact on root structure. We provide a definition for tree modification so that we limit the pruning of certain sizes of limbs. We initially had in there pruning limbs that were 10 inches or larger, and we've increased that to 16 just to be able to give a little bit of flexibility there. We're also sort of providing some level of limitations on properties being able to cut or prune critical root sizes within a certain distance of what's called the critical root zone of a tree. Sometimes if you start to prune roots of trees too close to the trunk, it really starts to inhibit not only the structure of the tree, its ability to sort of stay standing when it faced with a high wind event, but also its ability to be able to find as much nourishment as possible. As well as limiting the amount of root area that they can damage or destroy. You really want to make sure that you're not, for example, lopping off half of the root ball of a tree, because then structurally that tree will have a great tendency to topple over, because on that side it won't have the level of resistance. We also want to make sure that we're limiting the amount of soil that is deposited on top of an existing root ball, because that'll choke the ability for the tree to aerate and survive. Particularly with oaks, we will find that oaks have a very long and slow death. So if you pack a lot of dirt that chokes them out, it'll sometimes take 3, 5, 10 years for the tree to die, but it'll go into a very slow decline. So, we're talking about issues of scale here as well. We also define what a specimen tree is. And what we want to do here is not, sort of balance what the Florida statute allows. And we want to sort of really focus on efforts on this issue of what a specimen tree is, which are your larger canopy. And we're defining a specimen tree as anything greater than having a diameter of 18 inches. So a lot of the large oaks, such as the one that's right outside the door, will be considered a specimen tree. In fact, I think that there may be circumstances in the village that a lot of your more mature oaks could actually be considered either a heritage or a champion tree. So I think that those are really important, particularly to try to preserve. So we've provided some definitions in there. We've made them concurrent with some of the limitations that the county code has. Specific to modifications to your code, we just buttoned up some language in your tree protection code just to ensure that it is consistent with other portions of the code that also reference that, particularly to the tree removal permit. We're adding language in there to say that a village issued tree removal permit or a village issued tree work permit shall be required prior to removal or modification of any specimen tree. So again, it's not all trees, it's just the specimen trees, the large ones, with the exception of exempt trees that have already been included in the code based on the county. And this is where we try to corral the process we put language in there to say village issued tree removal permits shall be subject to the prior issuance of a tree removal permit by Miami-Dade County's DERM, upon proof of which the village tree removal permit shall be issued, providing that several different conditions are being met. And this is where we're trying to sort of say, one, you need to check in with the county, right? You also need to validate that process. But then there are also certain criteria that you need to meet. The first one is that the specimen tree needs to be deemed as a danger to persons or property. And we initially had in there that a minimum of 3 certified arborist reports had to deem that as dangerous. And the reason and rationale for that is that the rules of determination in tree evaluation are not set in stone. They're highly interpreted by the professional. We have arborists in our office, and there are times when, based on the standards, there's a difference of opinion. So it can be highly interpreted. That's why we had 3 in there. Coral Gables also has a requirement for several arborists to sort of come to the same conclusion. Some of the feedback that we heard back from the Planning and Zoning Board was that having so many arborist evaluations was too onerous on the property owner. So what we've sort of tailored down is to say, okay, a arborist needs to make this determination that it is dangerous, either an arborist or a licensed landscape architect. And that needs to be confirmed. And that's so instead of putting the onus on the property owner, we change the language to say a village contracted arborist. That way, if we're only going to require one arborist report, we understand that that arborist is beholden to the village and not to the property owner. So that way, we've seen evaluations on tree evaluations done that benefit the applicant and don't necessarily benefit the code. So we want to make sure is that they're giving an interpretation that is truthful, and that you as a municipality can oversee that and make sure that it is consistent.
If I could ask a question on that?
Sure.
I had gotten a complaint about an oak tree going down, somebody having it removed. And when they checked further, he had an arborist thing saying it's okay. It was an out-of-state arborist that they do this by mail. So this is going on. I mean, I don't know what we're talking about, arborists being local. I mean, this wasn't, I think the guy was from Maryland. I mean, he had never seen it. They did it by mail.
I have never heard of that happening before, but we'll have to check with the legal team and see if there are ways that we can make that accommodation.
Yeah, look into that, please, and see how you do it by mail. So we don't do it by mail.
Thank you for that. That's a great point. Then we try to define what is this approval process. And we put that into the language where there has to be an application review. There are certain requirements in that application review that they need to provide as part of their application that we think is important as part of the application package that goes to the planning board so that they can also have a determination on whether it merits or doesn't merit some level of consideration. We also laid out a process by which the applicant first needs to, so we prioritize sort of goals. The first goal is to preserve the existing tree on site and do everything possible to design the new building around the existing limbs or the existing tree. If that cannot be reasonably accommodated, then there is the second sort of process would be to potentially modify the tree. So to maybe look at cutting back the tree so that you don't have to lose the whole tree, maybe cut back a limb that's over an area where they want to sort of build. And then the third one is to relocate the specimen tree, which can be very expensive. To relocate the tree to somewhere that is within the village, not necessarily on the same site. So maybe if there is an appetite to be able to move it to a sort of right-of-way area where there's a deficiency of trees or shade, then that can be done as well. And the last option is to remove the specimen tree. Again, this is all about specimen trees. The last option would be to remove that tree. And we have some components in there to sort of regulate and define that. With regards to if you are going to remove a tree, then you need to mitigate that tree. Trees are personal property, but they're also a natural resource. And the way that the county looks at it is that it is a natural resource that needs to be protected for all the benefits that we talked about at the beginning. So if you are going to remove a tree, then that tree needs to be mitigated. And we initially had sort of piggybacked on the regulations that Miami Beach had adopted, because the Miami Beach mitigation requirements are such that they can be cost prohibitive. So they really sort of push the preservation of the tree to the foreground of the choices versus going directly and saying, let's get rid of the tree as a first step. There was a great deal of discussion at the planning board saying that based on the size of the properties here, there may not be enough accommodation of open space to be able to meet all these requirements, or just the cost of removing one of these large trees being as high as $20,000 or more. So what we did was that we basically reduced that by half in terms of the mitigation and the contribution. If you can't mitigate on your property and you want to contribute to a tree fund, then we quartered that so that then the cost would be more where this parameter discourages people from removing the tree, but it doesn't necessarily become prohibitive of removing the tree. So I think that with this, we're sort of trying to strike a little bit of a balance there so that we can provide those levels of accommodations. And then we have just language in there that specifies the quality of the new mitigation trees that need to come in and how those numbers are calculated. We also defined the tree preservation fund, which we don't have right now. So you would have to establish that fund and manage that fund. And the fact that towards the end of it, then a completion inspection needs to be done before the certificate of occupancy is issued. So this is where we try to corral the process. And this is why this diagram hopefully becomes really sort of beneficial. The applicant, a homeowner, wants to do a renovation or a build out, and they have a tree in the way. If they want to remove the tree, then they have to go through the Miami-Dade County Durham process for a tree permit. If that is approved, the way that the code is written right now is that if that is approved, then the village immediately issues a tree permit to allow the tree to be removed. Then the applicant does the work, and then at the end, on that blue square on the far right, then they get their CO at the end of that process. If it's not approved by the county, then they have to go back and either reassess the choice to remove the tree or redesign. What we're suggesting is to have an alternate process specifically for specimen trees, only for specimen trees, where they come first to the commission to request approval for removal. Again, these are trees that are not deemed a danger. Trees that somebody wants to remove because they want to improve their property. We've sort of put this, we've put this in the hands of commission because we think that it's incredibly critical for the preservation of the overall character and livability of the village. If the commission determines that the tree can be removed, then it goes to Miami-Dade County, and Miami-Dade County, the applicant would submit that to Miami-Dade County with the blessing that the village has already said, yes, we're okay with this being removed. And then Miami-Dade County would have that final determination. If the commission decides that it doesn't get approved, then they have to go back to the redesign process and sort of work themselves through that system again before going through those steps, again with the focus on trying to preserve as much of the tree canopy as possible. So some of the impacts that the recommendations that we're suggesting are going to have on the village impact not only process but also sort of funding. So from the perspective of the village issued tree work permit process, there is additional processing and additional staffing demands that are going to be had on your staff, and you're also based on the way that we've redrafted this. Then there's additional expenses that the village would have to do to inspect the tree to make sure that the tree is not a danger and either to people or property. So that way you're paying for the arborist, so the arborist is beholden to you, and they're not just doing whatever is most convenient for the applicant, but they're doing what is truthful to the standards. From a tree preservation fund, that needs to be established by commission, and then that will need to be administered by staff. In terms of the tree evaluation for the compliance with the Florida statute, again, that is a financial burden that the village would have to take on in order to be able to cover the expense of the ISA certified arborist or the landscape architect. And then from a permit enforcement standpoint, there are those additional demands to do that final permit or that final site inspection to ensure that no trees were being removed without a permit before a CO is issued. So that is how we have sort of tailored this at this point. And we are looking forward to discussion and comment and feedback. Thank you.
And just for everyone, if I can have Gianna, if you can stop sharing, because I just do want to be able to show something in case. So on the screen, you're seeing that there is a tree permit application with Miami-Dade County. They have it for, and here's their website for tree removal and relocation permits. They go into it. They have a dedicated number for it. And various municipalities are listed that also have the process in place. So this isn't unique to Biscayne Park, but it is a discussion to start talking about, hey, what would fit and what would not fit. We're talking, and again, it goes into modeling, just as Gianno has presented, being able to model the difference between non-specimen, specimen trees, the diameter. All of this is standard throughout the county, and the process that they have. So we're trying to mirror it while still customizing it to the needs of the village. So I just wanted to share that, and it's on the Miami-Dade website that anybody can look. It's a quick Google search. If you do Miami-Dade County tree permit, it'll come up, usually the very first one. And so you see all the information that they put for that. So I just wanted to show that so that everybody does see the county has this process in place. We do have Gage up in the microphone.
Yeah, for public comment now?
Yeah.
Hi, Gage Hartung, 114th Street. Just my recollection of our board meeting, I don't recall us talking about requirements being too onerous as far as preserving trees, or that the limbs should be increased, or minimizing the burden of the applicants for the trees. I do remember us talking about replacement mitigation requirements as being demanding, which would go into the arborist part that we talked about. And then contributions to the tree fund being prohibitive. I just don't recall those. I would gladly go back and listen to our meeting again. But I do recall our conversation on the arborist being that you have to get 3. The consensus was that, this was a little bit high. I do want to just kind of stop and go back to this. Throughout here, you reference the planning board. I don't think the planning board really wants to be involved with regulating the trees. I mean, I think one of the things is that we referred to you was that right now we don't require a landscaping plan when people do new development. So we wanted to see something in the language that landscaping plans were be submitted, so that when we are reviewing development applications, we could say, okay, you want to put something right where you have a huge oak tree. Can you maybe move it over to the side or something like that?
Okay.
But as far as any type of review of trees, of health, of removal, I think the planning board we're not here for that. And it's not really what none of us are tree experts or arborists or anything like that. And I would refer that to other boards that maybe have a lot more experience in that. As far as the arborist goes, I would piggyback on what was commented. We have the issue with our roof code that we redid about 10 years ago, where we had an engineer letter. All you need is an engineer letter to do something, and anybody can get an engineer letter for $50.
Yes.
And we've run into that situation on that over and over again.
Right.
It's like mail by, get by mail. So whatever language regarding arborists, it's got to be made sure that these are real people that are local, and that they know what they're doing. And then again, it was just, again, the P&Z just was interested in having some kind of landscaping plan submitted with applications. That was it. So thank you.
Barbara Kuehl. I am on the Park and Parkways Board, and I've been on it for about 20 years. I'm very familiar with Miami-Dade County's code, and there seems to be some misunderstanding here. We adopted Miami-Dade County's landscaping code, which happens to be a pretty good code. It covers just about everything we need. And the way the code reads is you can cut down any tree on your property. You do not need a permit. You do not need permission, as long as it's not a specimen tree. A few years ago, 2019, the Florida state came up with the new code that said, now you can basically take down any tree you think is dangerous. And dangerous, I think all of you are thinking that the limbs are rotted or something's wrong with the tree. No, it was very clear that their intent was, if a homeowner thinks that tree might break off in a hurricane and hit my house, I think it's a danger to me. That's good enough. They don't require an arborist to say the tree is rotted or the tree is going to fall over or create a danger. It just says if the homeowner thinks that tree is a danger, they can remove it. And there is nothing that this village can do. I don't know what. First of all, I would never recommend writing our own landscape code. We have a code that is being changed and updated when necessary by the county for free, and we can take advantage of it. It covers when a specimen tree, if the homeowner wants to take out a specimen tree and they're not claiming it's dangerous, the county is very specific in the steps that have to be taken. Why would we want to rewrite this? There is not one person in this village or has been in this village for 20 years that could handle inspecting any of these trees. We don't have the staff. We never have, and we probably never will. The best thing that we have is occasionally hiring somebody. And Gage brought up a really good point about when they're doing new construction plans, that they'd like something written in. Dade County Code, I'm sure you're familiar with Chapter 18A. It's very specific. It goes down to every bush you need, the percentage, the amount of palm trees, the amount of trees, except we don't follow that. why isn't the village following that? One of the reasons is because nobody seems to know about it. We don't have staff that's familiar with it. And I would rather see these new houses that go up, despite what they look like, even the good ones, they're putting in Home Depot landscape. They don't meet any of the requirements. And that should be an absolute for any new construction. However you want to do that, do it. As far as rewriting a code, the code tells you how much you can trim as far as taking off the crown. It limits you to so that you're not hacking a tree. It tells you with a specimen tree what happens if you can't move it, what happens if it's a danger, the percentage of the canopy that you have to replace, where with a specimen, you'd normally have to replace twice the canopy. If it's a danger, you can go down to 1 time the canopy. Everything's written out. I don't know why we're reinventing the wheel here. And I'm sure the commission isn't familiar with all the aspects of the code that's on the books now that we follow, but we should be sticking to that. And as far as the arborist, look, you said it yourself. I don't think anybody thinks that this is any different, that you can have 20 arborists, they can all be certified, and maybe you'll have 2 that really have the best interests of the tree at heart. So, you can, $20, you'll get an arborist who'll say anything. Having 3 arborists or having something from the city, honestly, I'd never be in favor of that. I think you're just opening up to making everything more expensive and onerous on the homeowner. And we have a very good code now. If the village would follow the code that we have, we'd be in good shape. Thank you.
Gary Kuehl, still living at 111th Street. I'd just like to emphasize what Barbara said about Chapter 18. We mentioned this to a succession of village managers and a succession of commissions, and it's just been ignored. It applies only to new construction, but it is a huge miss when people are building $2 million houses in Biscayne Park and they spend $50 on landscaping. The other thing is, Miami-Dade, as Barbara mentioned, is very specific about hat racking. We don't report it, we don't follow it. People hat rack trees in the village. If we're talking about preservation and protection of trees, we need to address medians. Every time there is a construction project or people that decide that's their private parking space, they park on the roots of trees, and that denigrates the trees. We do nothing when there is construction to mandate that contractors put up barriers around trees, which is common to pretty much the rest of the universe. To Gage's point and Barbara's point, there's nobody on the commission, a board in the village that is the least bit qualified to contribute to whether or not a tree is dangerous or not. And I do agree with the comment which was made that the arborist should be in the employ of the city. I think that is true. However, I do think whoever is asking for the review, they should pay for it. But I'd also like to point out that they're arborists and they're arborists. There's different levels of certification. I mean, you can be an arborist who's basically only trained to prune trees. I mean, they go on all the way up to arborists who are experts, that maybe there's only several hundred in the entire country that are qualified at the upper level. So, I think as difficult that is, I think the qualifications of the arborists need to be established, because the more qualified they are, the more likely they are really able to make the determination and be honest about it. Because as a professional, and being one myself, when you lie, when you fabricate, it puts your license in jeopardy. And if you're simply some guy who's trained to prune trees, he's not going to give a damn one way or the other. I think that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, and the Florida statute sort of sets that threshold at the arborist having to be ISA certified. So there are certain standards there that are being met. So they either need to be ISA certified, and ISA is the International Society of Arborists, or they have to be a Florida licensed landscape architect, which means that they're beholden to a code of ethics that holds their feet to the fire if they lie on some of these evaluations. We do see it day to day. We do plans review for many municipalities, and we have seen arborist reports that are really geared more towards facilitating the removal of the tree as opposed to being truthful to the quality of the tree to preserve its preservation. And just a point of clarification, we are not suggesting to rewrite the entire landscape code. We are piggybacking on the county's code, and we're trying to find locations where we can be a little bit more restrictive just to button up some of the looseness that could exist there. It is important to recognize that the county has requirements for new landscaping to be developed when properties get developed. However, with the exception of tree preservation, unless if I'm incorrect, it's pretty silent on residential requirements for new landscaping, with maybe some exception of buffer requirements or something of that nature. But it's not like a commercial property where based on the area, you have to provide, one tree every so much or something of that nature.
It is.
Right, yeah, okay.
For new.
But not rebuilds, right? Or renovations, correct?
Just to David Raymond again, I think on those points, and I agree with almost everything Barbara and Gary said. I think a lot of this is education, because we have a reoccupancy certification for people who are buying a home here that says, I'm buying a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home, and here's what it was before, and here's what it is now, and somebody comes from staff and does that. I think that if you look maybe upstream, I think the code's there. The county code is there if people knew about it. And I think that when you buy a new property here, if you're going to take something to this next level with the last issues we were talking about around development and the trees, I do think that it's incumbent upon the village, if we want to let people know how important these things are to us, is to provide them with those documents and it's some form of certification they sign that says, I'm aware of the code. I know I'm buying this property. I know I have to look at 18 point whatever. I know I'm buying this property. I know I have to. I think some of those things, if they're important to us, maybe that's the way to get it across, because otherwise, I'm a libertarian at heart. And I think that the way you have some of these things written about tree, the roots of the trees and all, nobody's doing that. Nobody's gonna do that. So I think you have to be realistic about it. I do, however, like the idea of having an unbiased opinion from an arborist who's not the guy who's coming to get $1,000 to cut down the tree limb.
Correct.
And if that could be paid for through the permit, if you say, okay, you want to remove a tree here, it's going to cost you $500 for the permit, because we pay the arborist, $350, and the village gets this much for administration, whatever. I think that way, first of all, you're letting the burden fall on the resident who's going to do this. And secondly, if it costs them enough, they go, I'll just take down this tree. Well, what if it costs you $1,000 on top of the $1,000 you were going to just do? Maybe they'll think twice about taking down the tree. So just a thought on those issues. Thank you.
Right, and that's what's called cost recovery. The applicant is paying for the application.
Yeah. I do think it's critical to recognize that you can never really control what the attitudes are of new people that are moving into the community. Right now, I think that everybody that lives here sort of really cherishes and values the quality that the community has and values the ability to preserve some of these trees, we would hope. But in the event that you have, people moving in this area that all their goal is to build is a big house and flip it, this is where I think it's really important to put those positions in place to try to preserve as much of this canopy as possible.
I'd just like to mention that the perennial pushback that we got from the commission as far as following the county ordinance for new construction, which they're really obligated to do regardless, was that we didn't have anybody qualified to review the plans, which was really a bogus excuse because it needs to be, the plan needs to be done by a landscape architect and the final product needs to be certified by the landscape architect. So it's not a burden on the village at all. And it's just been a really huge miss that we haven't followed that. Thanks.
And again, as Alex mentioned, that's something that can be structured through a cost recovery program, where the burden is put on the applicant and not on the village to have to spend the money on those resources.
Okay, I can formally introduce myself. Kate Davis, 12,000 Northeast 11th Place. So I have a laundry list. It's not in order, so bear with me. But just to recap kind of what Barbara said is I recently just found about this. Like I said previously, I'm on the chair of the ecology board and I would love to be involved in any further discussions on this and have us weigh in.
Absolutely.
This is the main purpose of me wanting to get on the ecology board is for this purpose. And so when I saw that it was happening, I was really excited. Unfortunately, it's a little discouraging based on the current statutes and our ability to enforce. So I personally, based on my professional experience, believe that under the 163.045 Florida statute, we as a local municipality or the county cannot regulate specimen trees if a homeowner has an arborist letter stating that. I mean, I would say that there has to be a Florida arborist, ISA, but there's, in my experience, and I have actual documentation from the manager at the tree section at Miami-Dade County, Durham, because I've received a lot of questions about this from homeowners, that no, as long as they have that letter, they're free to go. I, out of courtesy, tell my, clients, I would just send it to them, electronically, just so that they have it, so that there's no question. Again, I agree, an arborist will give you a letter, hand it out, and there's no repercussions and our canopy is lost. But based on what I've seen today, it seems as though, my discussions here are just for guidance. I've lived in Biscayne Park for over 10 years and I know that budget and staffing is always an issue here, but based on what we're presented is it seems like setting up a local jurisdiction for regulating trees and having a tree regulatory program, which I agree, I don't think we have the staff. It would be a burden to have an arborist or landscape architect on staff reviewing these. And I don't think that we have that ability to do that right now. Obviously, I would like to, because I like the trees, but like we discussed all today, that most of my Biscayne Park, I think all of it is single family residence, and per Miami-Dade County Code, you're not required to get a tree permit for non-specimen trees. So there's no financial gain here because the only money that we'd be getting off of permit fees to support the staff and whatever else would administratively need to be functioning would be for specimen trees. But single family homeowners aren't going to go get a tree permit. They're just going to get an arborist letter for $25 online and remove the tree, unfortunately. So I think here, the way to move forward is, as what everybody has been saying, is enforcing our landscape guidelines. So like the city of Miami, they have both landscaping replacement guidelines and they have tree removal. But as Barbara was saying, is we already have Miami-Dade County doing that work for us for the tree permitting program. So I think what we need to do is that when our plans come through the department is to make sure that they have their tree, their tree permit, and those plans are stamped or however the reviewers are looking at them, to make sure that they have their required tree permits if there happen to be a specimen tree. The other thing is that what everybody has been saying is that we should have like a consultant or somebody coming in, depending on how many landscape plans are coming in, to make sure that they're meeting the code requirements, and then having our inspectors trained in order to understand that they can't pass, give them the certificate of occupancy until those trees are in place. Like I've seen so much development here and I don't really know if that happens. I don't see a lot of trees going in, and nor do I see them meeting the native coverage requirements. So I think that one way that we could do it is, and again, I haven't looked at our landscape code at all. I haven't had the opportunity yet. And I don't really, I'm not familiar, I'm more familiar with the other municipalities' landscape codes rather than Miami-Dade County, but there could be a way that we could maybe talk to legal and see if there's a way that we could have our own more stringent. Obviously, we have to meet the code landscape requirements, but we could be more stringent on requiring native coverage, or certain, like City of Pinecrest requires so many pine trees being planted. Go figure. But something like that, I think that that's how we could sustain and regain the canopy that we are losing. And the other thing that that I see a lot, that I think the commission, or I mean the village could enforce more, is our right-of-way trees, or swale trees, obviously, but these new developments are just, you know, taking down the right-of-way trees, and those are the village's property, and those are our trees. So I think that we could maybe even enforce those more, or any right-of-way trees that are removed, make sure that those are being replaced, meeting the, I would say, the county replacement guidelines. I saw the replacement guidelines, and I don't think that we, you know, if that were ever needed, I don't think, you know, I don't know which route we're going to be going, but I think that the replacement guidelines should follow Miami-Dade County, and not, which is on canopy, not on DBH.
Okay.
I'm trying to just go through my laundry list and make sure that I did not miss anything while I'm up here. So again, one of the other things is that I think we could talk to the county, the village attorney about, is how much stricter can we go than the county? Because I know a lot of the other municipalities do have stricter landscaping requirements. And then the other thing is kind of seeing the workflow. So most municipalities that have jurisdiction over tree permitting, they don't, you're not required as a homeowner to get a Miami-Dade County tree removal permit and a Biscayne Park tree removal permit. At that point, it's just the Biscayne Park would be the regulatory agency. When it goes through plan review, the county would want to see that you have your tree removal permit, but you wouldn't want, or you can't put that regulatory burden on a homeowner to be required to get 2 tree removal permits. That's too much of a burden. And then whose replacement canopy requirements would you be following? Village of Biscayne Park and then Miami-Dade counties, that, like, for instance, the example that you guys gave, that's conflicting. That was, if I briefly ran a number, but the Miami Beach one is way less canopy replacement requirement compared to Miami-Dade County. So I obviously, we would have to follow, you know, I'm assuming it's comparison, but it has to be, because I don't know how Miami Beach could get away with it, but I just like ran a couple of numbers, and it seems like it would be more beneficial to use canopy replacement, especially for specimen trees, because Miami-Dade County specimen trees have a 4 times requirement. Yeah. So I don't know if you guys have any other questions. I'm happy to answer anything. I'm excited to see that, you know, we're making the initiative to try to preserve our canopy, because in the recent couple of weeks, it's just been nonstop. Like, oak is lost here and here and here, and it's sad, because that's what makes the village like precious place. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to make one statement, and I'm not sure of the building application process, but maybe a quick fix. When someone applies for a building permit for a new residence, do you give them a package of requirements such as landscaping, Chapter 18A? I mean, that could be a quick fix. So they see the requirements up front as part of the building permitting application process.
I think you need to speak into the mic. Yeah, I think you need to speak into the mic.
One of the other things that we may want to look at is, we were just talking about in the back of the room, was the landscape requirements for, you know, just adding on addition. Sometimes there may not be landscape requirements versus these, you know, redevelopments or demos and then redevelopment. We definitely should have landscape requirements for those. I don't know if we can do for like just like additions, if we can require that or not. I don't know if that is in place right now. So that's something that we could look into to gain more canopy in that way.
No, I think the only way to do that would be to tie it to a loss of pervious area. So that way, if you're building up, it's not so much a problem, but if you're building horizontal and taking up more footprint of the lot, then there may be a threshold, but we're gonna have to look at that very carefully and make sure that we're not sort of regulating in a way that puts the village at a liability risk or in the need of a litigation for something.
Right, exactly. We could do a code change potentially. I don't know if it allows, because when I looked at the other municipalities, I don't think that anybody requires that. And the other thing I don't know about with Biscayne Park is, do we require swales as part of new developments? Like on-site drainage swales, like a lot of municipalities or, the county, you have to have like a swale around to maintain your own on-site drainage.
You are required to maintain your drainage on site. You cannot discharge any of your drainage out into the public realm. So that's already baked into the building code and into the sort of umbrella code that the county has.
Okay.
So from that standpoint, but the village does not have a street tree requirement. I think the county does have a street tree requirements given certain categories of the zoning code. But we'll have to look at, we have to look at that.
Yeah, and then one last thing I didn't mention before, going back to the first discussion, is a lot of, I agree with, I think it was Barbara's comment as well, is that a lot of other municipalities and even HOAs have board of architects. And I don't think what everybody was kind of going at is that our planning board has the specialty or the professionalism to be able to evaluate for architectural design and if we were going to go that route. I mean, little code changes is fine because it can be done during plan review, but if we are going for certain aesthetics, which I don't know if that's what the commission's trying to do at this point, that I think we would have to have a board of architects or somebody, or other people with specialty on board to do that. Thank you.
I think that particularly when you start looking at constituting a design review board or board of architects where you want to have licensed professionals and experts on the board, particularly for small municipalities, that becomes very difficult because you don't necessarily have the population from which to choose from to get that. Even like Miami Beach sometimes has difficulty to be able to fill some of their seats on their design review board because it's really tough. Not that there isn't enough professionals, but to find professionals that are willing to give up the time to sit on the board. From an architectural review board, that can be very challenging. The more technical components of a landscape plans review, that can be done through outsourcing, through a cost recovery. We do that for the city of Weston, Surfside, North Bay Village. We do it for a number of different municipalities where we have arborists on staff that we can assist in that if that is something that is, of course, at the discretion and direction of the commission.
Well, to follow up with what you were saying, as far as the landscape architect, in the Dade County Code, it explains that you need to get a landscape architect to plug in the right number of trees, and it's very prescriptive. It tells you the percentage and amount of natives, and it also requires street trees, which we have never done, ever. We just ignore it. So if you want to make the new construction look better, that would be a very huge step. I mean, it's the law. It's if nothing comes out of this except that, if they actually start handing people the information and don't get, it shouldn't be done at the end either, because sometimes the commission will say, well, that's what our code officer will do. They'll see if it hasn't been done right. That's not when you do it. It regulates the sprinkler system, air conditioning, covers, it covers everything. It would make the properties look a lot better. The thing with renovations, it's always been something that, we've talked about, and we have different types of renovations. Somebody can put in $200,000 and you don't even see it from the street, and they may have a beautifully landscaped house, but then there are houses that are torn down completely, leaving a few walls standing. The entire lot is devastated. And then they put in the, like Gary said, $50 worth of landscaping. And, you know, if you have any suggestions on how you can give more direction to that so that we could do a code where if a certain percentage of the lot, it's not just the house, but if the lot has been destroyed, that you need a requirement of a certain amount of native, certain amount of even sod. There's a Dade County, you're not supposed to have more than 60% sod. So, I mean, it would go a long way. For some reason, we have something that states in our code, you have to get a Biscayne Park tree permit. We don't have a tree permit. That's a mistake. It should be taken out. You don't have two. We don't have one. We have nobody. If you ask anybody in this village, nobody would be able to hand you a tree permit. Gary said the medians, the trees on the medians need to be protected. When this commission passed their construction ordinance, the biggest misstep was leaving out trees on the median because those trees are being destroyed by major construction and minor construction. And if the village really wants to protect trees, because this state, the way the politics are leaning, it's taking away city rights, letting the residents do whatever the hell they want. And you're really going to be just fighting a losing battle trying to protect trees. And you'd be better spending some money educating residents, trying to get them excited about having trees, telling them how you don't have to pull out an entire tree when you can prune it properly. It won't be dangerous. You won't have an issue. You know, give them information, have workshops. And then maybe you'll see more trees remaining instead of people moving in and just nilly-willy just pulling out it, cutting down a tree. Thank you.
Is there anyone in the commission that would like to, so that, I know we're approaching 1 o'clock, it's 12:30.
I have a couple of questions, Mario, but I'll let the others go first if they want to. Anybody have any questions?
Mayor, Commissioner Hammelberg.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Has all of this gone through legal? And if not, can it before we see it?
It has not gone through legal, but we can certainly sort of funnel it through.
We have had some preliminary discussions with regards to how Senate Bill 401 from last year affects the land development and the upcoming comprehensive plan update. So those were some preliminary discussions, but we haven't gone through a full, yes, this is ready for ordinance type of discussion.
I'm just concerned that we would consider things that they would say after the fact aren't legal or.
No, anything that comes in front of the commission will always have a legal review.
Okay, very good. I think you answered one of my questions, Gianna. So if we decided we were to move forward with some of these things that require plan approvals for landscaping and things, your company could provide that service to us if we couldn't do it in-house. Okay.
We can. The only one that I would advise that we cannot do is the architectural review component, only because we don't have architects on staff.
Right, I'm talking the trees.
But the plan review permit and the landscape review, absolutely. In fact, I think that one of the comments is very well taken, that maybe sort of an education up front would be sort of a great first step. And then on the tail end, have a cost recovery structure where the applicant basically pays for the inspection of the site consistent with the landscape review to make sure that it is compliant.
Okay, I'm going to run through a couple. I'm going to run through these really quickly. If we were to consider any of these tree modification kind of things, would the village be required to follow it for its own trees on its own public spaces as well as residents?
Run that by me again.
If we were to consider any of these changes that you suggest regarding tree removal and all the things we just looked at for trees, would the village be required to follow the same rules and regs as residents would be? The village owns
Yes.
property and owns trees.
Yes.
Answer is yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Unless if at the time of adoption, the commission decides to provide some exclusions for some type of public benefit. For example, let's say you're doing a major sort of drainage improvement project because you have a huge sort of flooding issue and you have tree roots in the way. Maybe there are some opportunities there to sort of provide some exceptions, but I would limit those.
But it's not just we have to follow it. We would have some leeway there if we decided otherwise.
It depends on how we draft the language.
Okay, very good. I'm supposing we're going to follow other people's definition of specimen tree. Okay. You answered that one already. This is probably more of a comment or question for Mario. These two topics that we're here discussing today, two different things, can we separate them when they come to the commission so we aren't slowed down on one versus the other?
sense.
I don't want the trees to slow us down over something else or vice versa. If
sense.
there's something we can get done and move forward on more
Oh,
quickly,
absolutely.
I'd hate for that to happen. Okay. And regarding the landscape, because this is something I have discussed with lots of people for a long time, the fact that we don't enforce any of that for new construction. Is there a possibility, I think I know the answer, is there a possibility to retroactively require that be done for projects that were already completed? There's no way to make that.
No, that's legal quicksand.
So we blew it on the properties. Okay.
Yeah.
How about properties that are currently under construction? They're not done. There's no CO. Yeah. Okay. So if we did something in that regard kind of quickly and we just sort of tightened that part of it up, at least that we make people follow the county rules and things that we've been discussing, the properties that are currently, we could go to them and say, yeah, part of this is you have to finish this now. Okay.
Provided that it's adopted.
Right. Exactly.
Provided that it's adopted.
I can't go knock on their door now and tell them to do it. Yeah, I mean, it does.
No. Yes, no. Whatever has already been adopted, but that's just that sounds like it's an enforcement
Exactly.
issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like also, some municipalities have a requirement that if it's a new build, they put in the $50 landscaping, that some municipalities actually go back in a year to make sure that it's still there. So, I mean, I would kind of recommend that.
Yeah.
Because it's important.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you very much. Guys,
Thank
you did a
you.
great job for us. I appreciate
you.
This was a wonderful conversation from my perspective.
Thank you.
So just so that everybody knows, some of the next steps is, we're gonna get together again, start looking at some of the comments and feedback that we have and be able to illustrate that. Once we're able to work through all that, then we'll end up, especially for the tree section, we'll end up going back to Parks and Parkway and the Ecology Board, get their kind of comments, and see where because we had some really great comments today. And conveniently, some of the things we've just started kicking off that process reconstruction or modernization for the building and the permits and everything. So we can definitely incorporate some of these comments to make sure that if it wasn't being done in the past, we can definitely make sure that that is part of it and one of those required documents and everything that we can continue to move forward. So that's, we'll take all that to account. And then once we have those meetings and those feedbacks, then we'll come to the commission for some kind of discussion, but that's not going to be January, for example. We could be a few months out of that because we want to make sure we have enough time to listen to everybody and gather the feedback that we need. With that, I want to thank everybody so much for all the time that you've dedicated this weekend. I really appreciate all the comments that we heard, the questions, the comments, the suggestions. I think they were great for us to continue to move forward on this. And if anybody would like to have any further discussions or anything, you can send me an email. My email address is villagemanager@biscayneparkfl.gov. And we can always try to get either an email conversation or we can certainly try to get a Zoom conversation with our partners at Calvin Giordano if it's needed, or we can try to accommodate another type of when we'll be at the workshops or the advisory board so that we can have that public participation.
Mario,
Yes, ma'am.
I'd love to add one comment. I'd like to task you with talking to legal and seeing if we can get a letter stating what Miami-Dade County statutes are for all of our open building permits for new construction. And if he says we can we get a letter out to those people before they get their finals requesting that they follow?
You mean with regards to the landscaping? Yeah. We're going to move forward and take a look at that and see how that can be properly done. Thank you, everybody, and I appreciate everything. Have a great day.
You.